The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as Queen Regent Isabella paced the length of her private study. Her silk gown rustled with each determined step, and her emerald eyes burned with a fury that had been building for months. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times, reminding her that the royal council meeting was scheduled to begin in just 2 hours. Isabella had spent the entire night reviewing documents, photographs, and testimonies that painted a damning picture of Princess Catherine, the beloved wife of Crown Prince Alexander. What she had discovered would shake the very foundations of the Kingdom of Valdoria and potentially destroy the monarchy that had stood for over 8 centuries. The evidence was overwhelming. Princess Catherine, known throughout the realm for her charitable works and graceful public appearances, had been secretly funneling millions from the royal treasury into offshore accounts. But that was just the beginning. The deeper Isabella dug, the more sinister the web became. Catherine had been working with foreign agents, selling state secrets, and using her position to influence critical government decisions that benefited enemy nations. Isabella's hands trembled as she held the final piece of evidence, a recording of Catherine's voice discussing plans to assassinate key members of the royal family, including Prince Alexander himself. The woman who smiled so sweetly at state dinners and charmed foreign dignitaries was nothing more than a calculated spy who had infiltrated their family with the sole purpose of bringing down the crown. The Queen Regent had always harbored suspicions about Catherine. When Alexander first brought her to court 5 years ago, Isabella noticed something cold behind those sparkling blue eyes. Catherine's background story never quite added up. An orphan from a small village who somehow possessed the education and refinement of nobility. But Alexander was completely smitten, and the people of Valdoria had fallen in love with their future queen's humble origins and seemingly genuine compassion. Now Isabella understood why Catherine's charity work took her to so many remote locations throughout the kingdom. She wasn't delivering aid to the poor. She was meeting with contacts, gathering intelligence, and coordinating with foreign operatives. The children's hospitals she visited regularly weren't receiving donations. They were serving as cover for clandestine meetings, where she passed along classified information about military installations and security protocols. The revelation had come through Marcus Thornfield, the kingdom's most trusted intelligence officer. Marcus had been conducting a routine investigation into some minor financial irregularities when he stumbled upon a much larger conspiracy. His team had spent months carefully gathering evidence, using advanced surveillance techniques, and following money trails that led from Valdoria to several hostile neighboring countries. Isabella remembered the night Marcus first approached her with his preliminary findings. She had dismissed his concerns initially, unable to believe that someone so close to the royal family could be capable of such treachery. But as Marcus presented more evidence, the horrifying truth became undeniable. Catherine wasn't just stealing money. She was systematically working to destabilize the entire kingdom. The Queen Regent walked to her window and gazed out at the sprawling capital city below. Thousands of Valdorian citizens were beginning their daily routines, completely unaware that their beloved princess was a traitor of the highest order. The marketplace was already bustling with vendors setting up their stalls, and she could see the royal guards changing shifts at the main gate. All of these people trusted the royal family to protect them, and Catherine had been betraying that trust for years. Isabella's mind raced as she considered her options. The evidence was solid enough to warrant immediate action, but the political implications were staggering. Catherine wasn't just any member of the royal family. She was married to the crown prince and was expected to become queen when Alexander ascended to the throne. Arresting her would create a constitutional crisis unlike anything Valdoria had ever experienced. But there was no alternative. The security of the kingdom was at stake, and Isabella had sworn an oath to protect her people above all else. She reached for the ornate telephone on her desk and dialed the number for the Royal Guard headquarters. Captain James Morrison answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and professional as always. "Captain Morrison, this is Queen Regent Isabella." I need you to come to my study immediately with a full security detail. Bring restraints and prepare for a high-profile arrest. This matter is classified at the highest level, and I need your absolute discretion." Morrison's voice remained steady, though Isabella detected a slight note of surprise. "Of course, Your Majesty. We'll be there within 10 minutes. Should I alert Prince Alexander?" "Absolutely not," Isabella replied firmly. "Prince Alexander is not to be informed of this operation until after it's complete. In fact, I want him kept completely isolated until further notice. This is a direct order from the Crown." After ending the call, Isabella walked to her private safe and retrieved the files containing all the evidence against Catherine. The photographs showed the princess meeting with known foreign agents in various locations throughout the kingdom. Bank records revealed the systematic transfer of funds from royal accounts to offshore holdings controlled by enemy nations. Communications intercepts provided transcripts of conversations where Catherine discussed sensitive military information with her handlers. The most damning evidence was a series of emails discovered on Catherine's private computer. In these messages, she detailed her progress in gaining the royal family's trust and outlined specific plans for future operations. One email discussed the possibility of poisoning several key members of the royal family during the upcoming Harvest Festival, an annual celebration where thousands of citizens would gather to honor the monarchy. Isabella felt sick as she read Catherine's words describing Prince Alexander as a useful fool who was completely unaware of his wife's true nature. Catherine had written extensively about Alexander's daily routines, his security protocols, and his personal relationships with other members of the royal family. She had been studying him like a specimen, learning his weaknesses and vulnerabilities while planning his eventual destruction. The Queen Regent's hands clenched into fists as she thought about all the times Catherine had sat at their dinner table, sharing meals and participating in family discussions about state affairs. She had used every conversation as an opportunity to gather intelligence, and she had manipulated Alexander's love for her to gain access to the most classified information in the kingdom. A soft knock at the door interrupted Isabella's thoughts. Captain Morrison entered with 4 of his most trusted guards, all wearing the distinctive blue and gold uniforms of the Royal Guard. Morrison was a veteran soldier who had served the crown for over 20 years, and Isabella knew she could trust him completely with this sensitive mission. "Your Majesty, we're ready to proceed with your orders," Morrison said, standing at attention with his men behind him. Isabella handed him the arrest warrant she had prepared during the night. The document was signed with a royal seal and authorized the immediate detention of Princess Catherine on charges of treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the crown. Under Valdorian law, these crimes carried the death penalty, though Isabella hoped it wouldn't come to that. "Princess Catherine is currently in the Rose Garden with her morning tea," Isabella explained. "She follows the same routine every day from 8:30 until 9:15. I want her arrested quietly and brought to the detention chambers in the palace basement. Use whatever force is necessary, but I prefer to keep this discreet until we can properly inform the public." Morrison studied the warrant carefully, his expression remaining neutral despite the shocking nature of the charges. "Understood, Your Majesty. Should we search her quarters as well?" "Yes, but be thorough. Catherine is highly trained and likely has additional evidence hidden throughout her rooms. Look for secret compartments, hidden safes, and any electronic devices that might contain encrypted communications. I want everything seized and brought to the intelligence department for analysis." As the guards prepared to leave, Isabella felt the weight of what she was about to set in motion. Arresting Catherine would expose the kingdom's greatest security failure and potentially destabilize the monarchy for generations. But allowing a traitor to remain in their midst would be even more dangerous. "Captain Morrison, one more thing," Isabella called out as the group reached the door. "Prince Alexander must not be allowed to interfere with this operation. If he tries to intervene, you have my authorization to detain him as well. I know this is difficult, but the security of Valdoria depends on our ability to act decisively." Morrison nodded solemnly. "We understand, Your Majesty." The crown's security is our highest priority. After the guards left, Isabella returned to her window and watched as they made their way across the palace courtyard toward the rose garden. In just a few minutes, Catherine would be in custody, and the real challenge would begin. Isabella would have to explain to Alexander why his beloved wife was a traitor, convince the royal council that immediate action was necessary, and prepare the kingdom for the political upheaval that would inevitably follow. The Queen Regent closed her eyes and said a silent prayer for Valdoria. The next few hours would test the strength of their monarchy and determine whether 8 centuries of royal tradition could survive this ultimate betrayal. As she watched Captain Morrison and his team disappear around the corner of the palace, Isabella knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Part 2 Princess Catherine sat gracefully on the white marble bench in the rose garden, her delicate china teacup balanced perfectly in her hands. The morning breeze carried the sweet fragrance of blooming roses, and she appeared to be the picture of serenity as she gazed across the meticulously maintained gardens. Her golden hair caught the sunlight, and her pale blue dress complemented the peaceful setting perfectly. To any observer, she looked like the ideal royal princess enjoying a quiet moment of reflection. But Catherine's mind was far from peaceful. She had noticed increased security activity around the palace over the past few days, and her trained instincts told her that something was wrong. During last night's dinner, Queen Regent Isabella had been unusually quiet, and Prince Alexander seemed distracted and tense. Catherine's handlers had warned her that discovery was always a possibility, and she had prepared contingency plans for exactly this type of situation. As she lifted the teacup to her lips, Catherine's peripheral vision caught movement near the garden entrance. Captain Morrison and his guards were approaching with purposeful strides, their hands resting on their weapons. Catherine's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composed exterior, continuing to sip her tea as if she had not noticed their approach. "Princess Catherine," Captain Morrison called out as the group drew closer. His voice was respectful, but carried an underlying tension that confirmed Catherine's worst fears. "By order of Queen Regent Isabella, you are under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the crown of Valdoria." Catherine slowly placed her teacup on the small table beside the bench, her movements deliberate and controlled. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, and she was determined not to show any sign of panic or guilt. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake, Captain Morrison. I have no idea what you're talking about." "I'm sorry, Princess, but I have a signed warrant for your arrest," Morrison replied, producing the document from his uniform jacket. "You need to come with us immediately." Catherine stood gracefully, smoothing down her dress with practiced elegance. "May I see this warrant? I find it difficult to believe that Queen Isabella would authorize such a serious action without substantial evidence." Morrison handed her the document, watching carefully for any sign that she might try to flee or resist. But Catherine simply read through the charges with apparent calm, though her mind was racing through possible escape routes and communication methods she could use to alert her handlers. "These charges are completely absurd," Catherine said, handing the warrant back to Morrison. "I have served this kingdom faithfully for 5 years, and I have never done anything to harm Valdoria or its people. Queen Isabella has clearly been given false information by someone with malicious intent." One of the younger guards stepped forward with restraints, but Catherine raised her hand to stop him. "Is that really necessary, Captain? I'm willing to cooperate fully with your investigation, but I would prefer to maintain some dignity during this process. Surely you don't believe I pose a physical threat to your men." Morrison considered her request for a moment. Catherine had never shown any signs of violence, and she appeared to be cooperating peacefully. However, his orders were clear, and he knew that underestimating a potential spy could be a fatal mistake. "I'm sorry, Princess, but protocol requires us to use restraints for all high-security arrests. I promise we'll make this as comfortable as possible." As the guards moved to restrain her, Catherine's mind shifted into operational mode. She began cataloging every detail of their procedure, looking for weaknesses she could exploit later. The restraints were standard-issue handcuffs, nothing she couldn't eventually work her way out of if given enough time and privacy. Morrison was being cautious, but not overly aggressive, which suggested that they didn't know the full extent of her training or capabilities. "Captain Morrison, I assume Prince Alexander has been informed of this situation?" Catherine asked as they began escorting her toward the palace. She needed to understand how much the royal family knew and whether Alexander might still be willing to help her. "Prince Alexander will be briefed at the appropriate time," Morrison replied diplomatically. "For now, our priority is following Queen Isabella's orders and ensuring the security of the kingdom." Catherine filed away this information, realizing that Alexander was likely being kept in the dark about her arrest. This could work to her advantage if she could find a way to contact him before Queen Isabella had a chance to poison his mind against her. Alexander loved her deeply, and she had spent years carefully nurturing that relationship. If she could present her side of the story first, she might be able to convince him that she was being framed by enemies of the crown. As they walked through the palace corridors, Catherine noticed that the usual staff members were conspicuously absent. Isabella had clearly taken steps to minimize the number of witnesses to her arrest, which suggested that the Queen Regent was still trying to keep this situation contained. This gave Catherine hope that the evidence against her might not be as comprehensive as the charges suggested. The group arrived at a section of the palace that Catherine had never visited before. Morrison used a special key to unlock a heavy wooden door that led to a stone staircase descending into the basement levels. The air grew cooler as they descended, and Catherine realized they were heading to the palace's detention facilities, chambers that had been built centuries ago, but were rarely used in modern times. "This seems rather dramatic for someone who is supposedly innocent until proven guilty," Catherine commented as they reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement corridor was lined with thick stone walls and lit by electric bulbs that cast eerie shadows. "These are extraordinary circumstances, Princess," Morrison replied. "The charges against you are extremely serious, and Queen Isabella believes that standard detention protocols are insufficient given the nature of your alleged crimes." They stopped in front of a cell that had been hastily prepared with basic furnishings, a narrow bed, a small table, and a chair. The cell was clean and well-maintained, but it was unmistakably a prison. Catherine had gone from being a beloved member of the royal family to a suspected traitor in the span of minutes, and the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. "Captain Morrison, I would like to request an audience with Queen Isabella," Catherine said as the guards removed her restraints and prepared to lock her in the cell. "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding, and I'm confident that I can clear up any confusion if given the opportunity to present my side of the story." "I'll relay your request to Her Majesty," Morrison promised. "In the meantime, you'll be provided with meals and any reasonable accommodations you might need. A guard will be posted outside your cell at all times, and you'll be monitored continuously for your own safety as well as the security of the palace." As the cell door closed with a heavy metallic clang, Catherine finally allowed herself to show some emotion. She sat heavily on the narrow bed and put her head in her hands, though she was careful not to appear completely broken. She knew that everything she did would be observed and reported, and she needed to maintain the appearance of someone who was confused and wrongly accused rather than a trained operative who had been caught. Meanwhile, 3 floors above in the main palace, Prince Alexander was finishing his morning routine, completely unaware that his wife had been arrested. He had noticed that Catherine wasn't in their shared chambers when he woke up, but her absence wasn't unusual since she often took early morning walks or spent time in the garden. Alexander was actually looking forward to joining her for breakfast, as they had plans to review the guest list for an upcoming state dinner. Alexander's valet, Thomas, helped him into his formal morning attire, a navy blue uniform with the royal insignia and various ceremonial decorations. As Thomas adjusted the prince's collar, Alexander noticed that his valet seemed unusually nervous, fumbling with buttons and avoiding eye contact. "Thomas, is everything all right this morning?" Alexander asked, studying his valet's reflection in the mirror. "You seem rather distracted." Thomas cleared his throat nervously. I apologize, Your Highness. I'm just feeling a bit under the weather today. Nothing to concern yourself with. But Alexander knew Thomas well enough to recognize when something was genuinely wrong. His valet had served the royal family for over 15 years and was normally the epitome of professionalism. The man's hands were actually shaking as he tried to fasten the prince's ceremonial sash. Thomas, I can see that you're upset about something. Has someone said or done something to disturb you? Thomas stepped back and wrung his hands anxiously. Your Highness, I really shouldn't say anything. Queen Isabella specifically instructed all staff members to maintain normal routines and not discuss any unusual activities that might be occurring in the palace today. Alexander's eyes narrowed. His grandmother rarely issued such specific instructions to the staff, and the fact that she felt the need to do so suggested that something significant was happening. What kind of unusual activities, Thomas? I'm ordering you to tell me what you know. The valet looked around the room as if checking for eavesdroppers, then moved closer to Alexander and spoke in a low whisper. Your Highness, about an hour ago, I saw Captain Morrison and several guards escorting Princess Catherine toward the basement levels. She appeared to be restrained, and they were treating her like a prisoner. Alexander felt his blood run cold. That's impossible, Thomas. There must be some explanation. Perhaps Catherine was helping with some kind of security drill or a training exercise. I'm sorry, Your Highness, but it didn't look like any drill I've ever seen. Princess Catherine appeared to be under arrest, and Captain Morrison was carrying what looked like an official warrant. I also overheard one of the guards mention something about treason charges. Alexander's mind reeled as he tried to process this information. The idea that Catherine could be accused of treason was absolutely absurd. She was the most loyal and devoted person he had ever known, and she had sacrificed everything to become part of his family and serve Valdoria. There had to be some terrible mistake or misunderstanding. Thomas, I need you to find out exactly what's happening, Alexander said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Speak to the other staff members and gather as much information as possible. But be discreet. If my grandmother has ordered secrecy, then we need to be careful not to alert anyone to our investigation. After Thomas left, Alexander paced his chambers like a caged animal. His mind raced through possible explanations for Catherine's apparent arrest, but none of them made any sense. Catherine had no political enemies that he knew of, and she had always been completely transparent about her activities and associations. If there was evidence of wrongdoing, it had to be fabricated or misinterpreted. Alexander decided that he needed to confront his grandmother directly and demand an explanation. As the crown prince and Catherine's husband, he had every right to know what was happening and to ensure that his wife was being treated fairly. He strode purposefully toward Queen Isabella's study, his anger building with each step. When he reached the ornate double doors of his grandmother's private office, Alexander didn't bother to knock. He pushed the doors open and entered to find Isabella seated behind her massive mahogany desk, surrounded by documents, and looking as if she had aged 10 years overnight. Grandmother, I demand to know why Catherine has been arrested, Alexander said, his voice echoing through the large room. Thomas tells me that she was taken to the basement detention cells, and I want an immediate explanation. Isabella looked up from her paperwork with tired eyes that held a mixture of sadness and determination. Alexander, please sit down. We need to have a very serious conversation about your wife. Part 3 Prince Alexander remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides as he stared down at his grandmother. I will not sit down until you explain to me why my wife is being treated like a common criminal. Catherine has done nothing wrong, and I demand her immediate release. Queen Isabella's expression hardened as she gestured firmly toward the chair across from her desk. Alexander, you will sit down and listen to what I have to tell you. The evidence I'm about to present will be difficult to accept, but it's absolutely crucial that you understand the gravity of this situation. Reluctantly, Alexander took the seat, though his posture remained rigid and defiant. Isabella reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a thick folder containing photographs, documents, and transcripts. She spread them across the desktop, creating a damning display of evidence that she had been reviewing throughout the morning. For the past 6 months, our intelligence services have been investigating financial irregularities within the royal treasury, Isabella began, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. What started as a routine audit has uncovered a conspiracy that threatens the very existence of our monarchy. Alexander glanced at the photographs spread before him, recognizing Catherine in several of them. But the settings were unfamiliar: dark alleyways, abandoned buildings, and remote locations throughout the kingdom. In each image, Catherine was meeting with individuals that Alexander didn't recognize, their faces serious, and their body language suggesting clandestine business. "These photographs mean nothing, grandmother," Alexander said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Catherine travels extensively for her charitable work. She meets with all kinds of people in various locations. This proves nothing." Isabella picked up a bank statement and handed it to Alexander. "This document shows that over the past 3 years, Catherine has systematically transferred 12 million crowns from royal accounts to offshore holdings controlled by the Republic of Blackmore. Our neighboring enemy has been funding her activities and receiving classified information about our military capabilities and security protocols." Alexander studied the financial records, his eyes scanning the dates, amounts, and account numbers. The transfers were substantial and had been conducted with sophisticated techniques designed to avoid detection. But the signature on each authorization form was unmistakably Catherine's elegant handwriting. "This has to be forged," Alexander insisted, though doubt was beginning to creep into his voice. "Someone is trying to frame Catherine. She would never betray Valdoria or our family. She loves this kingdom as much as I do." Isabella leaned forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Alexander, I understand how difficult this is to accept. I've known Catherine for 5 years, and I genuinely believed she cared about our family. But the evidence is overwhelming, and we cannot ignore it simply because the truth is painful." She handed him a transcript of intercepted communications. "These are conversations between Catherine and her handlers in Blackmore. They discuss specific military installations, including the locations of our missile defense systems and the rotation schedules for our border patrol units. This information has already been used by Blackmore forces to conduct several successful infiltrations of our territory." Alexander read through the transcript, his face growing pale as he recognized technical details that only someone with access to the highest levels of classified information could possess. Catherine had attended numerous security briefings as his wife, and she had been present during family discussions about sensitive matters of national defense. "Even if these communications are real," Alexander said desperately, "there could be an explanation. Perhaps Catherine was feeding them false information as part of some counterintelligence operation that we weren't informed about." Isabella shook her head sadly. "I investigated that possibility, Alexander. Every piece of information Catherine provided to her contacts has been verified as accurate and highly damaging to our national security. 3 of our intelligence assets in Blackmore have been captured and executed because Catherine revealed their identities. 2 strategic military bases have been compromised because she provided detailed blueprints of their security systems." The Queen Regent stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the kingdom below. "But the most disturbing evidence involves plans for the upcoming Harvest Festival. Catherine has been coordinating with Blackmore agents to carry out assassinations during the celebration. The primary targets include you, me, and several key members of the Royal Council." Alexander's breath caught in his throat. "That's impossible. Catherine would never try to hurt me. She loves me." "Does she, Alexander?" Isabella turned back to face her grandson. "Or has she been manipulating your feelings as part of her mission? According to the intelligence we've gathered, Catherine was specifically trained to infiltrate royal families and gain access to classified information. Her entire identity, her background, her personality, even her romantic feelings, may be completely fabricated. Isabella returned to her desk and picked up a photograph showing Catherine in what appeared to be a training facility. She was dressed in military fatigues and appeared to be practicing with various weapons and surveillance equipment. The image was clearly taken years before Catherine had appeared in Valdoria, during her recruitment and preparation by Blackmore Intelligence Services. This photograph was taken at a Blackmore training camp 7 years ago, Isabella explained. Catherine spent 2 years learning advanced espionage techniques, including methods for seducing targets, gaining their trust, and extracting sensitive information. Everything you believe about her may be an elaborate performance designed to compromise our national security. Alexander stared at the photograph, struggling to reconcile this image with the gentle, loving woman he had married. The Catherine in the military training facility looked harder, more calculating, and completely different from the princess he thought he knew. But the facial features were unmistakably the same. I still don't understand how she could have maintained such a deception for 5 years, Alexander said weakly. We've been married for 3 years, and I've never seen any sign that she was anything other than completely devoted to me and to Valdoria. That's exactly what makes her so dangerous, Isabella replied. Catherine is a highly trained professional who has dedicated her entire adult life to this mission. She knew that maintaining your trust was essential to her success, so she became whatever you needed her to be. The woman you fell in love with was carefully constructed to appeal to your specific desires and vulnerabilities. Isabella handed him another document, a psychological profile that had been prepared by Catherine's handlers before her insertion into Valdorian society. The report detailed Alexander's personality traits, his romantic preferences, and specific techniques for gaining his emotional attachment. It read like a manual for manipulation, with Catherine's assignment being to study the prince's psychology and present herself as his ideal romantic partner. According to this profile, Catherine was instructed to present herself as intelligent but not threatening, independent but devoted, and compassionate but not weak, Isabella explained. Every aspect of her personality that attracted you to her was specifically designed to exploit your psychological makeup. Alexander felt physically ill as he read through the clinical analysis of his own character flaws and emotional needs. The document described him as romantically idealistic and susceptible to women who present themselves as needing protection while maintaining strong moral principles. Catherine had apparently followed this psychological blueprint perfectly, creating a false persona that would appeal directly to his subconscious desires. But what about all the charitable work she's done? Alexander asked desperately. She's helped thousands of people throughout the kingdom. Surely that demonstrates her genuine care for our citizens. The charitable work was part of her cover, Isabella explained patiently. It gave her legitimate reasons to travel throughout the kingdom, meet with various contacts, and access locations where she could gather intelligence. Many of the organizations she claimed to be helping were actually fronts for Blackmore intelligence operations. Isabella showed him photographs of several children's hospitals and relief centers that Catherine had supposedly been supporting. Intelligence analysis revealed that these facilities were being used as communication hubs and safe houses for foreign agents operating within Valdoria. Catherine's charitable donations were actually funding espionage activities rather than humanitarian efforts. The people of Valdoria believe Catherine has been helping them, but she's actually been using their trust to gather information about our domestic security arrangements and social vulnerabilities, Isabella continued. Her handlers plan to use this intelligence to coordinate civil unrest during the planned assassinations at the Harvest Festival. Alexander slumped back in his chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the betrayal. Everything he had believed about his wife and their relationship was apparently a lie. The woman he had trusted with his deepest secrets and most intimate feelings had been systematically exploiting his love to destroy everything he held dear. Grandmother, even if all of this is true, we can't simply arrest Catherine without giving her the opportunity to defend herself, Alexander said. grasping for some way to maintain his faith in the woman he loved. Perhaps there are circumstances we don't understand. Maybe she was being coerced or threatened. Isabella's expression softened slightly. Alexander, I understand your desire to find an innocent explanation for Catherine's actions, but we have recordings of her voice discussing the assassination plans with enthusiasm. She wasn't being forced to participate. She was actively planning and coordinating these attacks. She activated a recording device on her desk, and Catherine's familiar voice filled the room. But instead of the gentle, loving tone Alexander was accustomed to, Catherine's voice was cold and calculating as she discussed the most efficient methods for poisoning members of the royal family during the Harvest Festival banquet. The prince will be easy to eliminate because he completely trusts me, Catherine's recorded voice explained to her contact. I can ensure that he consumes a lethal dose of toxin without suspecting anything until it's too late. The Queen Regent will be more challenging because she's naturally suspicious, but I believe I can access her private dining arrangements through Alexander's influence. Alexander felt his world collapse as he listened to the woman he loved discussing his murder with the same casual tone she might use to plan a dinner party. The recording continued for several minutes, with Catherine providing detailed information about security procedures, guest lists, and seating arrangements that would facilitate the planned assassinations. "That's enough," Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. Isabella stopped the recording and watched as her grandson struggled to process the devastating revelation. "I know this is incredibly painful, Alexander," Isabella said gently, "but you needed to hear the truth. Catherine isn't the woman you thought she was, and we cannot allow sentiment to compromise the security of our kingdom." Alexander stood slowly, his legs unsteady as the full impact of the betrayal hit him. "What happens now? What will you do with her?" "The Royal Council will convene this afternoon to review the evidence and determine the appropriate response," Isabella explained. "Under Valdorian law, the crimes Catherine has committed carry the death penalty. However, there may be value in keeping her alive if she's willing to provide information about other Blackmore agents operating within our borders." "You're talking about executing my wife," Alexander said numbly. "I'm talking about protecting our kingdom from a foreign agent who has systematically betrayed everything we stand for," Isabella replied firmly. "Catherine made her choices, Alexander. She chose to infiltrate our family, manipulate your feelings, and plan our murders. We cannot allow those choices to go unpunished simply because you once loved her." Alexander walked to the window, staring out at the same view Catherine had admired from the rose garden just hours earlier. Everything looked different now that he knew the truth. The palace that had been his home felt contaminated by Catherine's presence, and he wondered how many other secrets she had learned during their years together. "I want to see her," Alexander said finally. "Before the Royal Council makes any final decisions, I want to confront Catherine directly and hear her explanation for these crimes." Isabella considered his request carefully. "That could be dangerous, Alexander. Catherine is highly trained and potentially unpredictable. If she realizes that we've discovered her true identity, she might attempt to harm you or escape custody." "I don't care about the danger," Alexander replied. "I need to look into her eyes and understand how she could have deceived me so completely. I need to know if anything about our relationship was real or if it was all just part of her mission." Isabella nodded slowly. "Very well, but you'll meet with Catherine under strict security protocols, and our conversation will be monitored and recorded. I won't allow sentiment to compromise your safety or the security of this operation." Part 4. 2 hours later, Prince Alexander found himself walking through the stone corridors of the palace basement, flanked by 4 armed guards and accompanied by Captain Morrison. The weight of the evidence against Catherine pressed down on him like a physical burden, but he needed to face her directly before he could accept the complete destruction of everything he had believed about their marriage. The detention area was unlike anything Alexander had ever seen in the palace. The ancient stone walls seemed to absorb sound, creating an oppressive atmosphere that felt more like a medieval dungeon than part of a modern royal residence. Electric lights cast harsh shadows that made the corridor feel cold and unwelcoming, a stark contrast to the elegant chambers where Catherine had spent the past 5 years as a beloved member of the royal family. Your Highness, I want to remind you that this conversation will be monitored and recorded for security purposes, Captain Morrison said as they approached Catherine's cell. If at any point you feel threatened or uncomfortable, simply give the signal and we'll end the meeting immediately. Alexander nodded, though his attention was focused on the heavy wooden door ahead. Behind that barrier was the woman he had loved more than his own life, the person he had planned to crown as his queen and the mother of his future children. Now he had to confront the possibility that everything about their relationship had been a carefully orchestrated lie. The guards unlocked the cell door, revealing Catherine sitting composed on the narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap. Despite her imprisonment, she had maintained her regal bearing and elegant appearance. Her golden hair was perfectly arranged, and her pale blue dress showed no signs of distress. When she looked up and saw Alexander, her face lit up with apparent joy and relief. "Alexander, thank goodness you're here," Catherine said, rising gracefully and moving toward him. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I desperately need your help to clear this up." Alexander stood in the doorway, studying her face for any sign of the calculating spy described in the intelligence reports. But all he saw was the woman he had fallen in love with, beautiful, vulnerable, and seemingly confused by her circumstances. For a moment, he almost believed that the evidence against her had to be wrong. "Catherine, I need you to tell me the truth about who you really are," Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled. "I've seen evidence that suggests you're not the person you've claimed to be." Catherine's expression shifted to one of hurt confusion. "Alexander, what are you talking about? I'm your wife. I'm the woman who loves you more than anything in this world. I don't understand what kind of evidence could possibly make you question that." Alexander stepped into the cell, though he maintained his distance from Catherine. The guards remained in the doorway, ready to intervene if necessary. "Show her the photographs, Captain Morrison." Morrison handed Alexander a folder containing some of the most damning images. Pictures of Catherine meeting with known Blackmore agents, training at the espionage facility, and reviewing classified documents. Alexander spread them on the small table, watching Catherine's face carefully for any reaction that might reveal her true nature. Catherine examined the photographs with apparent bewilderment, picking up each image and studying it carefully. "Alexander, I don't understand what these pictures are supposed to prove. Yes, that's me in some of these images, but the contexts are completely different from what they appear to show." She pointed to a photograph showing her meeting with a man in a dark alley. "This picture was taken during one of my charity visits to the eastern provinces. That man was a local administrator helping me coordinate relief efforts for flood victims. We met in that location because his office had been damaged and he was working out of a temporary shelter." Alexander wanted to believe her explanation, but the intelligence analysis had identified the man as a high-ranking Blackmore operative. "Catherine, that man has been identified as Colonel Victor Kozlov, a senior intelligence officer with the Republic of Blackmore. He's not a local administrator." Catherine's eyes widened with apparent shock. "That's impossible, Alexander. He told me his name was Marcus Thompson, and he presented credentials showing that he worked for the Provincial Relief Agency. If what you're saying is true, then I was deceived just as much as anyone else." She moved closer to Alexander, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "Don't you see? Someone has been using my charitable work as a cover for their espionage activities. They've manipulated me into unknowingly facilitating their operations, and now they're trying to frame me for their crimes." Alexander found himself drawn into Catherine's explanation despite everything he had learned. Her performance was so convincing, so emotionally authentic, that he almost believed she could be an innocent victim rather than a calculating spy. But then he remembered the recordings of her voice discussing assassination plans. "Catherine, we have recordings of you discussing plans to assassinate members of the royal family," Alexander said, watching her face for any flicker of recognition or guilt. How do you explain conversations where you explicitly discuss methods for poisoning me and Queen Isabella? Catherine's face went pale, and she sat heavily on the bed as if the accusation had physically staggered her. Alexander, that's completely impossible. I would never hurt you or anyone in your family. I love you. How could you believe that I would ever plan to harm you? She looked up at him with tears in her eyes, and Alexander felt his resolve wavering. If such recordings exist, then they must have been fabricated using voice synthesis technology. Blackmore intelligence services are known to be sophisticated in their use of audio manipulation techniques. Alexander turned to Captain Morrison. Play the recordings. Morrison activated a portable audio device, and Catherine's voice filled the small cell, cold and calculating as she discussed assassination methods with her Blackmore contact. Alexander watched Catherine's face as she listened to herself planning his murder, looking for any sign that she recognized the conversations. But Catherine's expression showed only horror and confusion as she listened to the recordings. Alexander, that voice sounds like me, but those aren't my words. I never had those conversations. Someone has created false recordings to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. She stood and moved toward him, her hands outstretched in supplication. You know me, Alexander. You've lived with me for 5 years. Have you ever seen any sign that I could be capable of such violence? Have I ever said or done anything that would suggest I didn't love you completely? Alexander's mind raced through years of memories, searching for any indication that Catherine had been deceiving him. But every moment they had shared seemed genuine. Their quiet conversations late at night, her tears of joy when he proposed, her gentle care for him when he was ill. Either she was the most accomplished actress in history, or there was something wrong with the evidence against her. Catherine, if you're innocent, then how do you explain the financial records showing that you transferred millions of crowns to Blackmore accounts? Alexander asked, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. I don't know anything about any financial transfers, Catherine replied immediately. I've never had access to Royal Treasury accounts, and I wouldn't know how to conduct international transfers even if I wanted to. Someone must have forged my signature or used my identity without my knowledge. Alexander looked at Captain Morrison, who had been observing the conversation with professional interest. Captain, is it possible that someone could have forged the financial documents? Morrison's expression was neutral as he considered the question. Voice recordings and financial documents can both be falsified with sufficient technical expertise, Your Highness. However, the volume and consistency of the evidence against Princess Catherine would require an extremely sophisticated and long-term operation. Catherine seized on this admission. That's exactly what's happened, Alexander. Someone has been conducting a long-term campaign to frame me for their crimes. They've used my charitable work as cover for espionage activities, forged my signature on financial documents, and created false recordings to make it appear that I was working with foreign agents. Alexander found himself torn between the compelling evidence presented by Queen Isabella and Catherine's equally compelling denials. Either his wife was the most dangerous spy in Valdorian history, or she was the victim of an elaborate frame job designed to destroy the royal family from within. But why would someone go to such lengths to frame you specifically? Alexander asked, what would they gain by making you appear to be a traitor? Catherine's eyes lit up as if she had just realized something crucial. Alexander, think about what's happening right now. I've been arrested on charges of treason. Our marriage has been compromised, and the royal family is being torn apart by suspicion and doubt. If I'm executed or imprisoned, you'll be devastated and distracted. The monarchy will be weakened at exactly the moment when our enemies are planning their real attack. She moved closer, her voice becoming more urgent. Don't you see? This is all part of a larger plan to destabilize Valdoria. By destroying your trust in me, they're destroying your ability to lead effectively. The real spies are probably still operating freely while we're focused on false evidence against an innocent person. Alexander felt a spark of hope at Catherine's explanation. It would certainly be consistent with Blackmore's sophisticated intelligence operations to create such an elaborate deception. By framing Catherine, they would effectively neutralize both the Crown Prince and the royal family's unity without having to risk an actual military attack. Captain Morrison, has our intelligence service considered the possibility that Princess Catherine is being framed? Alexander asked. Morrison hesitated before responding. Your Highness, our analysts have examined that possibility extensively. However, the evidence against Princess Catherine comes from multiple independent sources and spans several years. Creating such a comprehensive false trail would require resources and access that would be extremely difficult for any foreign intelligence service to maintain. Catherine stepped forward again, her voice taking on a desperate quality. Alexander, you know me better than anyone else in the world. Look into my eyes and tell me that you truly believe I could be capable of the crimes they're accusing me of. Do you really think I could have spent 5 years pretending to love you while planning your death? Alexander looked into Catherine's blue eyes, searching for any hint of deception or calculation. All he saw was the woman he had fallen in love with, vulnerable, frightened, and pleading for his trust. Either she was innocent of the charges against her, or she was such a skilled actress that detecting her deception was impossible. Catherine, if you're innocent, then you'll have the opportunity to prove it during your trial, Alexander said finally. The Royal Council will review all the evidence, and you'll be able to present your defense. Catherine's expression shifted to one of desperation. Alexander, by the time a trial concludes, it may be too late. If the real traitors are still operating freely, they could complete their mission while everyone is focused on prosecuting me. You have to convince Queen Isabella to release me so I can help identify the actual spies. Alexander turned to Captain Morrison. I want a full review of all intelligence sources and methods used to gather evidence against Princess Catherine. If there's any possibility that she's being framed, we need to identify it immediately. Morrison nodded respectfully. I'll relay your request to Queen Isabella and the intelligence services, Your Highness. However, I should point out that Princess Catherine remains in custody pending the Royal Council's decision regarding her fate. As the guard prepared to escort Alexander from the cell, Catherine made one final plea. Alexander, please don't let them execute me for crimes I didn't commit. I know this situation looks terrible, but I swear on everything we've shared together that I am innocent. If you ever loved me, please fight for the truth. Alexander paused in the doorway, torn between his love for Catherine and his duty to protect Valdoria. Catherine, if you're innocent, I promise that the truth will come out. But if you're lying to me now, if everything about our relationship has been a deception, then you've destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable. Catherine's voice followed him as he walked away. I love you, Alexander. That's the one thing in all of this that has never been a lie. As Alexander made his way back through the stone corridors, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and possibilities. The evidence against Catherine was overwhelming, but her denials were equally compelling. Either he had been living with a master spy for 5 years, or the woman he loved was being systematically destroyed by enemies who understood exactly how to tear the royal family apart. In 3 hours, the Royal Council would convene to decide Catherine's fate. Alexander knew that he had to make a choice between trusting the intelligence services that had protected Valdoria for generations or believing in the woman who had shared his bed and his deepest secrets. The wrong decision could either cost Catherine her life or allow enemy agents to complete their mission of destroying the monarchy. As Alexander emerged from the basement levels and returned to the main palace, he realized that his confrontation with Catherine had resolved nothing. He was no closer to understanding the truth, and time was running out for everyone involved. The fate of his marriage, his crown, and possibly his kingdom would be determined by decisions made in the next few hours, and Alexander had never felt more uncertain about anything in his life.